Thanks so much for finding us here at the Morning Glory Project. I'm your host, Betsy Graziani Fassbender, and my co-producer, Angela Washington, and I are ever so proud and honored to bring the stories of amazing people to you. These are survivors, thrivers, innovators, and trailblazers who tell us not just their stories, but how they got through whatever they got through to get to where they are. We hope you find them as inspiring as we do. Thanks so much for listening and for giving us the honor of your time. I welcome to the Morning Glory Project today Susanna Solomon, who's written this book, Paris Beckons. But I met Susanna because of her previous works, and she wrote Point Reyes Sheriff's Calls, which Point Reyes, California is a little coastal town or near coastal town here. And they, like lots of small towns, have their police blotter. Essentially, they call it their sheriff's calls. And Susanna has this marvelous knack of picking just the little tidbits of those calls and then fashioning a whole story out of them. And those are utterly delightful. But I meet with her today after she's written Paris Beckons, which is like Susanna herself, exactly her own. It's a mix of fiction, some personal memoir I'm gathering, into these interwoven short stories that bring together the notion of life and loss and love and memory and independence. It's a beautiful collection, and we have lots to talk about because the arc of Susanna's story is coming from being a girl in the 50s who were not expected to be career women at all and were not given either the instructions nor support to do so. And then through circumstances, it became necessity that she did. So she is here today celebrating Paris Beckons, but we'll also mention, of course, her other work of fiction, which is Montana Rhapsody. That's a whole nother story there. Susanna, thank you for being part of the Morning Glory Project. I'm so happy to welcome you today.
And thank you, Betsy, for welcoming me on the first of what could hope to be sunny days.
Yes, we should say that at the time that we are recording this in California, it has been raining and raining and raining and raining and raining for a good long time. And today there is sunlight. We tried to record this a few days ago and got bumped off because the power went out. So your imminent patience is appreciated. So Susanna, tell me just a bit about your story, because as I mentioned, how you say it is, you were a girl that grew up in the 50s, and basically you were expected to be a housewife, as most women were at that time. And so your life took another turn or two. Could you tell me just a little bit about the arc of that story?
Well, like all good girls, I was an English literature major because oftentimes it's a non-career oriented major. And I always loved writing and I always loved reading. So I was married in the early 70s when I was just barely 21 to my first husband, and due to circumstances that he liked to drink a great deal, I found myself in an untenable situation. When he was out of work due to an accident he had, I went to work as a receptionist for Frank Howard Allen, making $5 an hour. And I thought, I can do better than this. And I really wanted to get out of the marriage, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And I knew that I was going to have to support myself and my children. And if I had left the marriage unprepared, I would still be making probably now $15 an hour as a receptionist, rather than almost $300 an hour I make as an electrical engineer.
And you use a euphemism in a way. You say he liked to drink. It was more than he liked to drink, from my understanding.
Well, we were married 18 years, and out of the 18 years, alcoholism is a progressive disease. So the first couple of years he drank some, and the next couple of years he drank more. And it turned out in the last 5 years, he was drunk 6 days out of 7.
Mm.
And he'd storm around the house and yell and scream at me and the children and then pass out. And then the next day, or then when he woke up, he had a hangover and he was miserable and he'd lash out to us until he started drinking, and the whole cycle replayed over and over and over.
Which is just such a heartbreaking way to try to live. And, I think that in that era in this country and existing for various reasons now, even still, and elsewhere, it didn't feel like a choice to be able to leave and go try to support your kids on $5 an hour and keep them fed and housed and all of those things. And so you felt captive. And rather than leave and be completely impoverished, you chose another route. Can you say a bit about that? Because going from being a receptionist for $5 an hour to being an electrical engineer is not just a one-step jump. How did that happen?
Well, I had a friend then who was at the reentry program at the College of Marin,
which is our local community college.
Right, who asked me to design the cover for a little booklet she had to encourage mostly women to get into the engineering program. And inside the booklet, it basically said, becoming engineer is just one step after another, and you can do this. And since I felt at the time that I'd been thrown down a flight of stairs with a bucket of cold water thrown after me, that I'd been cheated out of the possibility of doing any better, I decided to go in the exact opposite direction from how I'd been raised and get what is often considered to be a man's career with opportunities of growth and change and a reasonable salary. I went to the College of Marin and I started studying arithmetic because I had failed my first arithmetic test there.
Mm.
And I was at the math lab 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, so 12 hours a week to prepare to take math in engineering. I discovered that I could tutor math. And by tutoring math at that time, I was making $50 an hour.
Wait, so I have to slow down here a minute because there was a whole lot packed into that little story. So you're designing a cover for a brochure, a pamphlet of some sort, a booklet describing this, and you, rather than just designing the cover, you open it up, take to heart and say, well, heck, if it can be done one step at a time, I got 2 feet, I can one step at a time myself, I can figure that out. And despite the fact that you were an English major, not necessarily thrilled in the directed toward the math department, and then having failed it, you pushed your sleeves up and studied. Mm-hmm. And discovered what I think a lot of people discover is that it's not that you didn't have the capacity to do it, it's that you just simply hadn't done it before. It hadn't been taught well, or you hadn't tuned into that for whatever, all of those reasons, or a bad teacher or whatever, discouraging messages from society. Then you discover, wow, I actually do have a capacity for this, enough to teach it to other people.
Learning math is like a bicycle, it's a muscle. And my muscle had not been appreciated or loved. But I had a wonderful drop-in math teacher at the College of Marin, a gentleman named Bart Sarkis. And he said, it's just exercises. You just come in every day and exercise with me and you'll do great. And he was completely correct.
So sometimes there's that miracle person that comes across our path, isn't there, that helps to be a bit of a champion and cheerleader and mentor. I'm so glad that you did. So this didn't happen overnight. You worked at the College of Marin, got your basics there at the community college, and then went on and graduated summa cum laude with your electrical engineering. Was that the?
Now I never thought I was going to be able to do this. So I was always thinking, well, if worse comes to worse, I can tutor math, I can be an engineering tech. It turned out that early muscle exercises with mathematics made it fun for me. And I was very much driven by the fact that I saw it as my ticket out of a bad marriage. So when my husband was drunk and screaming and going around the house and yelling at us, I was very encouraged to keep heading out on my goal of studying and going to school. But when he was nice and gentle and sweet, then I was very confused because, well, my marriage is okay. Why am I working so hard?
Mm.
So it worked in a reverse kind of way. I was very driven to continue. And a lot of people, women particularly, are afraid of math. But if you look at it as just a series of small steps, starting with arithmetic, you can do it.
That in and of itself is admirable enough. And then that's sort of the beginning of this in a way. It's both the middle of your story and the beginning of later on then becoming an author. So ironically, you had this English major, you went into the engineering field, and now in semi-retirement have authored now 3 books.
4, yeah, 4.
4 books. And Susanna, I can say from having encountered you any number of times, we've met at various writerly functions, and because we shared a publisher on one of your books and those kinds of things, that you are what my family would lovingly call a oneer. You're such a one-of-a-kind kind of a person. And you always have a little different way of looking at things than I sometimes expect. So I'm always delighted by our conversations. And Paris Beckons gives the quirky stories in the Point Reyes Sheriff's Calls are delightful and interesting and peculiar and surprising. But in Paris Beckons, it's this weaving together of fiction, your call to be in Paris, but also that it weaves some of your life in. Can you say a little bit about the marriage of life and even a touch of what one might call paranormal experience in Paris Beckons?
I will discuss one story. I think it's probably called the Eiffel Tower. And it took me a long time to get the courage up to go to Paris. And as a single woman in my 60s, but once I got into it, I can't stop now. I just think it's a beautiful city. But I went to the Eiffel Tower with my daughter when she was 21 years ago. And I went back before it burned. And so my story in the book Paris Beckons is my going there before it burned more recently.
Are you talking about Notre Dame or are you talking about?
Notre Dame. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. Oh, you said Eiffel Tower, so I thought, wait a minute, did that burn and I missed it?
Feeling there was something wrong with that. No, it's Notre Dame, before Notre Dame burned.
Yes.
And I started with what was then the present of walking into this cathedral and going up all of the stairs and listening to the people go and making my way up and up and up because I wanted to go to the rooftop. And somewhere along going up to the rooftop, I remembered being there with my daughter. Mm. So then the 2 of us are going up and up these stairs. So when we get to the rooftop, then I move into a little bit of a different reality in that it would be a good story if there was a great storm on the roof of the Eiffel Tower, on Notre Dame. And in the old days, and as it will be again, there was aircraft cabled across the top so you couldn't jump off. But I decided that it would make a good story if a bolt of lightning hit that wire and opened up a hole in it, and the wind tried to take my daughter out through the top of Notre Dame. So then, of course, as all mothers would jump up and pull her back out of the storm. So part of the story is true, that I did go up the stairs. I did go there with my daughter, but I didn't save her from a storm that would take her away across the rooftops of Paris.
Well, you played the wonderful game that fiction writers get to play, which is, what would happen if? What would that be like?
Yeah.
So there's another moment in your story, though, that you read from when I went to your book launch, and it was about an encounter with your mom, in a way. Can you tell me just a bit about that?
Well, the thing that got me in Paris, my father was a professor, and he used to travel to Europe quite a bit when we were children. And Paris was one of the places we would visit. And my mother died when I was 14. So she was long gone by the time I got to Paris in my 60s, and so was my father.
And she died under tragic circumstances, of course. Can you say a bit about that before you go on?
Oh, yes, she committed suicide.
So you're 14 years old. You've lost your mom to suicide. It devastated your family, of course, and there were other devastations as well. So later on, when you do find yourself in your 60s, obviously, many years later, I won't do math in public, you find yourself in Paris.
And I was standing on the quays there looking over the Seine as an adult in my 60s, and I felt my mother's hand in mine. She was so solid next to me, and it ran shivers up and down my spine because it was such a strong feeling.
And you're not a person prone to hallucinations or any of those things, or even really flights of fancy. You seem like such a feet on the ground kind of practical person. What was that like for you to have that?
Oh, it was incredibly intense. It was extraordinarily wonderful. I mean, it didn't make me feel sad. It made me feel just completely thrilled and excited. But she was absolutely right there. That was one of the places where I'd seen her with me.
What do you make of that today? What not necessarily a religious belief, but what's your belief about that encounter?
Oh, she was in my mind the whole time, all this time.
Mm.
And I was this extraordinary. I mean, I've gone back to the same spot, and I can't get that feeling back. I went to the Picasso Museum. My father was an art collector and an art lover. And in the Picasso Museum, he appeared very strongly next to me, criticizing me for not understanding art. So I felt the same thing, not as pleasant, but with him being so much there physically.
And this is one of those moments, Susanna, when I say, I don't know what that is, but I'll take it.
You'll take it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know where to put that. Is that just imagination and longing that turns into sensation, or is that visitation or memory? Whatever it all is, it sounds like it informed your life and validated your choices and perhaps brought you some peace with your parents. Does that feel so?
Peace with my mother, for sure. I mean, so I wrote about, I think I put the story in the Sensual Piece. I wrote about her, finding her sitting next to me and how that felt, and how, instead of saying, it's wonderful to see you, which adults would say, I think I said, and I wrote this in the story, you left us. Well, as we all, as we all could. But no, it was extremely strong, extremely strong. So I see it as basically a memory really coming to life, but it's very associated with place.
I wonder about such moments and how we sort of reconcile ourselves, reconcile our memories with our lives as they are now. And also recognizing or finding resolution for that child's loss now that you're a grown and mature woman. It's such a moving thing. I don't know what I believe about those things, but like I said, I'll take it. There's something about how we knit ourselves back together again after losses.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. I felt like I was getting pieces of myself back.
Well, and as anybody who's listened to this podcast for any length of time would know, I too am a survivor of suicide loss in my own family. And I have welcomed many such, I'll call them encounters because I don't have another word for it. But whether it is a certain smell or a certain sensation or picking up an object that was connected to that person, that there's something beyond, paranormal doesn't necessarily mean, that you beyond Twilight Zone. It just means beyond normal, beyond what we can understand. And I treasure those things because they bring peace to me.
That definitely did. Definitely, very much so. Oh, there are other stories in Paris Beckons that are flights of fancy, but the family stories to me mean the most.
Well, and also what I like, the reason I called you kind of a oneer and a trailblazer in a certain way is that you broke a lot of rules in the publishing rules with this book. Like, is it fiction or is it memoir? Are these interlinked short stories? It just seems to me that you wrote the story that you freaking wanted to write.
Exactly.
You did in a way what you did in how you got out of your marriage. You did it the way, one step at a time, in building this and building it how you wanted it to be. And it's interesting because it is my belief that our lived stories and our imagined stories in fiction, I'm not talking about lying out in the world and being dishonest, but that our imagined stories can be just as true, and I'm putting air quotes around that true, because they reveal some essential truth about ourselves. So that moment of your daughter on the roof of Notre Dame, though imagined, reveals something about you and your relationship to her and your being a mother of her, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it says about your mother-daughter relationship?
How much I needed to save her, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Enough to study for 6.5 years and get yourself and her and out of an abusive relationship.
Yeah. And when I finally did graduate and I finally did get a job and I was able to at that point make more money than my husband had ever made in our marriage, I was all ready. I mean, I was ready to go and had my grand plan and asked him to leave. And he said, "What was the one thing I did that made you so annoyed?"
What was he wanted one answer, like one day?
One thing, it's like, no. But in retrospect, I have met many women who have divorced without preparing for it, have struggled to make ends meet, have asked me, well, how did you do it? And, well, gee, that sounds like a lot of work. Well, it was worth every day.
Hmm. And look, there's no right or wrong way to leave an abusive relationship. And each person has to blaze their trail in the way that they must. And sometimes there's not time, that it's life-threatening and they got to get out today, whether they've got a plan or not. So sometimes it's leap and then find the parachute after you jump. And that's the way that it has to go for someone. I'm grateful for your tenacity and your determination in building your own bridge out of where you were and to where you wanted to go. And I'd be willing to bet that your children remain grateful for that today.
They may not say that to me.
Well, that's a whole nother matter, Mama. That's a whole nother matter. Well, Paris Beckons is a beautiful story. Montana Rhapsody is a delight. It's more of a romp in a way. And the Point Reyes Sheriff's Calls are just intriguing ditties that I invite everyone to read. So Susanna Solomon can be found at her website, and it's Susanna, Susanna, Solomon with all O's, SOLOMON.com, of course. And so I'm grateful, Susanna, for your time today, and so grateful for our encounters. I'll look forward to many more.
Always a pleasure, Betsy. Always wonderful to see you.
My conversation with Susanna today put me in mind of how far we have come for women and independence and education in this country, the United States, and how far we still need to go. And how really it isn't even a full generation back when women were not encouraged at all to get an education or to have a career that would sustain them as independents because they were meant to be wives and mothers only. And that put them into situations that were untenable sometimes. As a survivor of tragic suicide loss, Susanna then found herself in an abusive marriage. And by golly, if she didn't use everything she had and everything she didn't even know she had to build a bridge between the life that she was leading and the life she wanted. It's exciting and moving and inspiring to hear such a story. There's another piece of her story that really comes to mind, and that is how thin the veil is between what's seeable, touchable, knowable in what we think of as the scientific world, and the spirit, the imagined, the longed for, the felt, the intuited. And sometimes I think that we separate those as really far apart things, just like we separate the bookshelves in a bookstore between fact and fiction, memoir, history versus fiction, which is imagined. And it's been my long belief that fictional stories, and I'm not endorsing lying out in the regular world, of course, but our fictional storytelling can reveal great truths just as our lived stories can. Susanna's stories in Paris Beckons make me think of that. And as she discussed in our conversation today, that line between imagined and real, quote, experiences, it's not such a hard line. If you have lost someone you love, but you've felt their presence, felt it, known they were with you, nobody can tell you it's not real when that happens. And who's to say it isn't? Thanks so much for listening to the Morning Glory Project today. And I hope that whatever losses you may have endured, whatever chains may be holding you back from having a life of your design, that you can find little nuggets of inspiration in Susanna's story. And that can help you to bloom.